All right, I'm gonna give my best shot to try to understand how to graph polar equations here. So if I have r equals 2 cosine theta, if I make the x-axis the theta axis and the y-axis the r-axis, note that the period is going to be equal to 2 pi divided by that number, which is pi. Therefore, we do the whole thing in pi. If I do the whole thing in pi here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go here, doing the best I can here. And then now I'm going to go again. That should be at 3 pi over 4. That should be pi over 4. But, as you graph, as you know, it's pretty tough. Okay, so go down to here, there, and there. So that's, if we go from 0 to 2 pi, one period's done in pi, so we have 2 periods in 2 pi. Awesome. Now, as theta goes from 0 to pi over 4, note that r goes from 1 to 0, okay? As we go from pi over 4 to pi over 2, pi over 4 to pi over 2, we go from a radius of 0 to -1, 0 to -1. As we go from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 4, pi over 2 to 3 pi over 4, I go from radius of -1 to 0, -1 to 0. And as I go from 3 pi over 4 to pi, 3 pi over 4 to pi, I go from a radius of 0 to 1. Now you can finish the rest of them, but I'm just doing this for brevity. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that situation and I'm going to graph it over here. As I rotate from 0 to pi over 4, my radius goes from a radius of 1 to a radius of 0. So as I rotate this way, my cursor's got to get closer and closer to the pole. Okay? So as I rotate, as I do that, I'm going to get closer. As I rotate, it's got to get closer and closer to 0. There it is. Okay, so there we go, from 0 to pi over 4. Now as I go from pi over 4 to pi over 2, I go a radius of 0. That means as I rotate from here to here, I got to rotate to get a radius of 0 to a radius of -1. Well, I usually do it from 0 to 1, and then I just flip it with respect to the pole. So let's do it from 0 to 1. If I rotated from 0 to 1, it would have looked like this. But if I look at that flip image, it'll actually look something like that, okay? Because we're not going from a radius of 0 to 1. If I was going a radius of 0 to 1, I'd be getting bigger, but actually I'm getting bigger but negatively, so it's actually going to go this way, okay? So now as I rotate from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 4, I'm rotating this way. Imagine instead of going -1 to 0, if I went 1 to 0. If I went 1 to 0, it would have been a radius of 1. As I rotate this way, I'd have rotated it down and it got to radius 0. But I'm not rotating from a radius of 1 to 0. I'm rotating from a radius of -1 to 0. So I look at the reflection about the origin here, and it'll look like this. Boom. And then as I rotate from 3 pi over 4 to pi, 3 pi over 4 to pi, I'm getting from a radius of 0 to a radius of 1, and it'll look like that. And I think you see if I keep going, I'm going to get something that looks like this. Boom. That's if I go from pi to 5 pi over 4, and then so forth. And you'll see that I get this beautiful 4-leaved rose.